And I think first check if there's anyone public comment. Anyone have their hand up?
There are no public on the meeting tonight.
Okay.
It was just the email that came through today from one of the townsfolk.
Yep. Do we want to go ahead and approve the minutes? Do I hear a motion for?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, any opposed? All right. So do we want to, I think, Lauren, it seemed like you actually took the comment from Justin and brought it to the town clerk, if I saw that email and read it correctly. Yes. So we're good. Okay. So one of the things that we were going to talk about was the section 10.1.3 emergency action. And on Monday, I spoke with Peggy just to maybe get a little bit more information from her beyond what she had told us back in November. I think it was November 29th, she came and we talked with her. So if we want to, I'll just go to that section and maybe quickly just go over what was, what she had said. And I'm looking at the comment one just to start off, where if the state declares a state of emergency, the town will automatically declare a state of emergency. So that is an addition to what's currently in the charter. And then going down to clarifying authorize action by the first selectman or the acting first selectman if the first selectman cannot be reached. That was another addition. I think changing from automatically stand repealed and going out to 30 days instead of 21 days. And then I think the bigger section underneath is what I think Peggy talked about when she first met with us. And that's adding in, after the initial 5-day period, any 3 members of the Board of Selectmen may petition to the town clerk to hold a special meeting for any purpose. And then I think this is where there was some discussion with our committee about checks and balances, because it changes some of the, or gives more authority, I think, to the first selectman as it relates to budget and establishing emergency shelters. So I just kind of went back over what was added in with Peggy on the call. And then we kind of started back with, what do you see as kind of having a little bit more time now between when we talked, and what did she see as kind of some of the challenges with this? And I think the first thing that she brought up is that it's just not clear the way it's written currently how the executive orders really come into play. At least that's how she felt, because she felt when she was reading it, when it had to happen, she had a lot of questions. And Lauren, maybe you can add a little bit more to that if you have any, or anyone on the committee who may have more experience with executive action or emergency action, executive orders.
Yeah, I think what we found cumbersome in the beginning of the pandemic is that there was no precedent in town about the town enacting emergency orders or emergency executive orders. And so the state was doing these things and saying, okay, towns are now innate, we're empowered to create certain policies or allow, for instance, for changing the tax deadline for payment of your taxes without a penalty. And so we had no process in place. So we were holding special Board of Selectmen meetings. And at the beginning of the pandemic, we were all remote. it was hard to get a quorum some days. And so it did feel kind of cumbersome to try to get everybody together to do an executive order. So that was one thing that Peggy had brought up when she had come to you guys in November, was just trying to determine if there was a way to charterize that the first selectman could institute executive orders that were empowered by the state. So not just things that unilaterally someone thought was important, but something that the town needed to do. We were empowered by the state, and could we enact them without having to go to the full board, was the impetus.
Yeah, and I think, that was one of the questions I had is, would the town ever enact a state of the town, or, other than following the state or the state doing it? She said, yeah. And then that's typically in some type of weather event. I think with IESIS that happened, she said. So, just trying to get some clarity that the difference of the uses from storms is different. You're also dealing with FEMA, she said, as opposed to, other agencies. So I guess the question starts
even if the state declares a state of emergency, they may release the statewide, but the shoreline a lot of times still keeps it because of flooding and impact from, and it's almost always hurricanes or blizzards. Those are the two big guys. So
yeah,
nor'easters.
Yeah, so I think, and then again, unprecedented to have more than kind of two events that require, for example, if we do end up, quote unquote, getting this massive storm over the weekend, there could be, things that are specific to that on top of what's going on with the pandemic. So, I think some of this is just how much and what needs to be in the charter to help with this area of the charter under emergency action. And I think at the beginning, she went back to, the use of executive orders and the ability to write, enough in the charter so it's well understood when they're used and the powers of the first select person. So she kind of said, if it could be explained a little bit better in the charter as it relates to the use and the authority. So I think some of that is reflected in what's written in now that we put in. And then I think the other kind of question she had is around executive order versus a change in policy. And that being a little bit of a gray area. And going back and reading the 7 that Lauren sent out as examples, you said some of those things, again, kind of fall into the policy bucket per se. And, I'm just going to kind of go over what she said, and then we can go back to where we want to start. I found interesting is that, when we looked at what we had written in, establish an emergency shelter location, including by takeover the Board of Education facilities. And, and I was asking her about, for example, the library. Even though the town, at 80% of the operating budget of the library is from the town does not have control of the library. So they couldn't necessarily use that unless they get, permission. Same with the schools. The firehouse is not a town building. It's volunteer. So again, kind of interesting piece of how much needs to be in the charter to drive what happens. And with the recent experience, I just think there's some of these things have come out that you probably have never used in the past or have never really thought about.
Right, so we've never taken over a school before, but now with the 10-year plan, that is kind of the designation that Polson will become the emergency shelter.
Right.
Because, our current emergency shelter, which is the gym, is actually in like one of the lowest parts of the flood zone. So it you know, we always sit there and hold our breath. I remember holding breath going, okay, if the surge goes this far, we're okay. If it goes a little further, and, you know, like when I was on the Board of Selectmen, there was a hurricane coming through and it was Superstorm Sandy, and it went through faster than anyone expected. And it was like, great. If it had gone on its trail, it would have flooded up through Route 1 and including the emergency shelter, because the river would have been overflowing, and it was just all this message. And to have the prep presentation by the emergency management team, you know, several days ahead of time, because you can see this thing coming, you know, full moon, high tide. It was like, okay, we've got really the worst possible scenario happening. And then for it to come through really quickly and go, phew. So, you know, I like having, because at the time we weren't allowed to take over the Board of Ed's buildings because they're considered the Board of Ed buildings. I don't know if it'll stand as far as the attorneys go, but I like having that in there just in case in the future there's a change on the Board of Ed and the superintendent and things like that, and that person says, no, you can't use the building. So
yeah, because that's Joan, that's what I asked her. I said, well, I can remember, I mean, she said that she went directly to the superintendent, and that's how she was able to get the use of the building. And so it's relying on that relationship versus something that is just automatic.
Joan, do you think it'd be better if we just said all public service buildings, or just to broaden it out so that she would have, or the person would have access to the senior center, the schools, the library, whatever is public service?
Buildings
like
that are under the auspices of the town and Board of Ed budgets.
Mm-hmm.
Because then that could also open up the library and the firehouses and things like that.
Yeah.
Yes, because the senior center is the town, so she can use the senior center, but I think that that's probably a good fix because those other buildings do receive money through the budget either. Yeah.
And Liz, I you know, maybe we could talk about this later, but just to put on our parking lot is, what triggers an emergency situation? Like we're talking about, if the state does it, it's automatic, but there could be a situation where just the town is, if there was an outbreak of a contagion, if there was, you know, something blew up or something like that, that it could be just we probably should define, you know, when would it trigger, even if it wasn't a state emergency.
Yeah, no, good point. And to that discussion, she strongly recommended to either have Sam DeBurr or Chief Drummond come and talk a little bit about the EOC and potentially some type of a, like you said, a spill or something that's contained to Madison, but does require to flip that switch. And so that was one of her recommendations. Or
Guilford tries to attack us.
Again, yes.
After the Thanksgiving Day game.
Yeah.
Right. After they get humiliated, they would do that. Yes.
I think that's a really good idea. And I think we should ask them back because, you know, there are times when, I mean, you could have a touchdown of a tornado that just goes through Madison. I know that's not usual happening, but something off of a hurricane could spin that off. Nothing else gets hit. There have been times when, you know, I remember when there was a gentleman on the loose with heavy arms, and, you know, Homeland Security came. There was a whole bunch of people that all of a sudden just, you know, started off with the police department, and then boom, we had FBI, we had Homeland Security, we had all these people, and he was on state roads in Madison. He was eventually caught, but they were saying that, you know, had it gone any longer, they could have done a lockdown, stay in, shelter in place kind of thing. So, and I don't know if that's considered a state of emergency at that point in time, or, you know, where does that fall into those pieces? And I think, you know, Chief Drum and Sam DeBurr would know more than, you know, we would on those types of things.
Yeah, the other one that she brought up was a cyber attack of maybe the, you know, the town hall offices where they're targeted Madison facilities like the police department, the fire department. again, that in essence, and that's why she thought both Chief Drummond and Sam would be good just to come back and walk through some of these scenarios that probably back in the day weren't even something the charter would have to consider. So cyber attack, of course, is definitely one that is becoming more and more of a challenge.
So is it defined or not defined here at all? Is it better to not define a state of emergency and let the Board of Selectmen define it? Or, and yeah. I think that's a question for the attorneys too.
That was going to be my only suggestion, was just being careful about what you do put here if you decide to charterize it, because God forbid there's some new form of emergency that comes up and we list certain things and it doesn't encompass something else in the future. You know, we don't want to add anything in here that's going to become obsolete or restrict in the future. So I would hazard to say that it's probably left purposefully vague on purpose, but you should definitely review that with the attorney when they come back.
I think we need to leave flexibility for a declaration of a state of emergency.
So do you all feel that this first sentence, if the state declares a state of emergency, the town will automatically declare a state of emergency. Upon finding that a state of emergency exists in the town pursuant to section 4.14K, so for the Board of Selectmen may. So this is where then that gives kind of that flexibility to determine if the town needs to declare a state of emergency or go into emergency action.
Depending upon what's in 4.1.4K, right?
Yeah, I think that was, back to look.
Up there, it was just up there a second ago.
Yeah, I didn't know we changed some of the lettering. So let's see.
So I don't think we're trying to make the wording perfect here. I know that's really the job of the.
Okay, here we go.
Board of Selectmen, or in the absence of establishing a quorum within reasonable time frame, the first selectman shall declare a state of emergency. I think that allows, I like if we can't establish a quorum, if like the lines are down and the internet's out and people are sheltering in place because it's a winter storm or a hurricane, and emergency offices. I mean, I can tell you from experience, this is not done in a vacuum. This is on the recommendation of all the, you know, the fire chiefs, the police chief, the first responders, the fire marshal, you know. So it's not like, okay, we're going to do that. It's more like everybody gets into the room, they talk about it and say, this is the timing of it. And then we do as much of a notification as possible. But there were times when we couldn't do it via Zoom and we were trying to get a quorum. And I was in town hall, Fillmore was in town hall, and we're waiting and waiting. Al was the only one in town. The other two people were out of town. So we were like, if Al can't get here, what are we going to do? And we were saying, we've got to declare it no matter what, even if it goes against the charter, because it was one of the storms.
Yeah, I think that language is good. I wonder, guys, that other sentence there, a declaration of emergency will automatically be declared. Is that, so therefore, does that kind of render that other first sentence meaningless or redundant in that other section 10.1.3? Because you're already calling it out here, right?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is pretty close to what we're saying in the opening, that addition. You're correct.
Yeah, so I think you could just rip that one out and leave this here because this is under the declaration of emergencies section.
Right,
but
and
that's just my thought.
And I like what's highlighted in yellow, that we should add some language that the first selectman, you know, has to, you know, 24 hours or within X number of hours of declaring if they can't get a quorum, which is a lot easier now because we can have the hybrid meetings. But
right.
I think that before taking unilateral action, it's easy when it's a hurricane. It's easy because that's so far out. Even the nor'easters, it's easier to do it that way. But when it's like the responsive piece of, you know, there's a toxic spill, there's something that happens immediately. I think that's where it might be also a question to ask the emergency services guys. How many hours, days, whatever, do you think a quorum should try to handle? Or maybe we say that if it's a unilateral action upon suggestion by the emergency action committee, you know, the people who are going to be responsible for responding.
The highlight that you called out there, Joan, was that identified by Peggy, Liz, or is that just something that we knew that we needed to take action on, and that's why it's highlighted?
Yeah, I think Peggy didn't mention it in this go round, and I'm trying to remember back in November if that's when it was. Lauren, do you remember if that's when it was added in here, or is it something that came up later?
So this is all just stuff that came up from your conversations with a multitude of people. And the reason why it's highlighted is because I knew it was something that you guys needed to go back and take another look at. I will say that I do remember that the idea of being able to rescind the declaration of emergency with a quorum of the full board, I believe, was from Bruce Wilson. Mm-hmm. So this is, you know, this came from a few different conversations, but just kind of, I tried to capture what we left this conversation with the last time, things that we needed to come back and look at again.
So looking at it from a contractual standpoint, putting my pseudo lawyer hat on, because I'm not really a lawyer, but I work with so many contracts. The reasonable time frame I like because it may vary. So yeah, it may be reasonable for 5 days ahead of time to start looking at that, or 3 days ahead of time, or 2 days, or it may be reasonable for 2 hours if it's, you know, a toxic spill.
Yeah.
So Joan, what if we got away from a time frame and actually had event-based, that in good faith that each selectman, two attempts we made to contact each selectman by phone, and, you know, go that way instead of time, because I'm just concerned, like, you know, with some, like you're saying, if there's some toxic spill, some crazy somebody driving up the road, you got to be able to react like that. So maybe an event.
I like that idea. I just feel like we could come up with a grid. Like I know what you mean, Joan, on a contractual basis. You know, you've got the big problems with a system, but you better respond in 2 hours, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Or you got a day to figure this out, or you got 5 days. But instead, maybe for this, it's because now everybody is pretty much connected. You know, you give it the two-time try
within 2 attempts. So maybe rather than reasonable time frame, within 2 attempts, in the absence of establishing a quorum of the board within 2 attempts.
Very good.
Of contacting all board members. I think that needs to really be stated. You know, you can't just say, oh, I'm going to try to get 3 people in here. You want to try to at least contact all.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
All right. Did I see Joe just join?
You're still on the hook, Liz. You got this.
Exactly. Keep going. This is going great.
You're driving the struggle bus.
Smooth, right?
So, sorry, I teach on Wednesday nights, and I had a lot of students queued up.
No worries. We just, I basically, Joe, went over what Peggy and I talked about as it related to the emergency action section. And we're just now going somewhat line by line. And in the beginning, it refers back to section 4.1.4. I think the big take home was just making it clearer when, you know, an emergency action happens. And then I think one of the other big things we talked about is possibly bringing back Sam and Chief Drummond to talk about some of the EOC and maybe better defining some of, you know, the newer things that can happen in the town, or things that might just have the town be declaring an emergency, not necessarily being state driven.
No, I think it's a good idea, because the EOC was always a little bit of a black box because it was always obvious when it was kicking in, you know, snowstorms, hurricanes. Now,
I just want to point out before Bob says something, but with Joe's background, every so often he has this like angelic halo around his head, like some kind of medieval picture.
You know what? Nobody else ever says that. I think what you're seeing is a little bit of illumination problem.
No, it could be.
Yes, interesting. I don't see this halo at all. Maybe
when he backs up, you'll see a halo come up. Yeah.
You know, Liz, just keep going. I liked it better. Things were moving along smoothly, and I showed up angelic. This is the best meeting I've ever had. So I liked what you guys were saying about the 2 attempts when I joined in as a, you know, give it the kind of college try. That seems reasonable. I have no idea if it's reasonable. I suppose we should ask Peggy, but it sounds like a reasonable idea.
Lauren, does it sound reasonable to you? Because you'd be the one making the calls or assisting on the calls.
Yeah, I think that's totally reasonable. And I think it's doable for whoever's in the office. Between me, her, Sam, you know, we can attempt to help. And I
Right.
think that like you guys said, it gives a kind of a clearer timeline of, you know, what her parameters are, or what the first selectman's parameters are for trying to establish that quorum.
Okay.
What my comment was is that I thought we had decided that when we referred back here to section K, is that we like it, that it doesn't try to give a laundry list of possible reasons for calling a state of emergency, because we said, well, look, what happens? Okay, toxic spills, hurricanes, tornadoes, natural problems, you know, invasion by one of our neighbors, Guilford, yeah. But that if we come up with some kind of a list, there's a problem of something that we haven't thought of.
Right.
So
Right.
there's a great advantage of leaving it without providing a list.
Right. Yep. I think we agree on that.
I think so too.
Yeah, I like the way it is now. I get it says that yes, this can happen, but it just says, you know, with a board of selectmen or in the absence of. I think it gives us that flexibility.
Right. But I like having that within how many days post calling the declaration of the emergency, the first selectman has to convene the full board, and then the ability of the majority of the board to rescind the declaration can be called by the first selectman. I think as long as I think we have to say when the town calls it. So like, once again, if we're under the state's state of emergency, we can't sit there and go, no, we're not going to be part of it. Correct? I don't think we should.
Yeah.
Well, so in the event that there was a state of emergency just for our town and it wasn't the state, I can't see that emergency lasting too long. So maybe under those situations that we have a shorter amount of time that it automatically expires, and then the board of selectmen the full board could come together to renew, but there's an automatic safety net.
That's an interesting idea. Yeah. So hurricane, we may call, even though the state doesn't. Tornado, toxic spills.
Dog day afternoon situation.
Dog day afternoon situation.
Well, an easy example that did happen was, I don't know if you guys remember, around the time of Irene and Sandy, there was this terrible ice storm in Hartford that didn't hit us. So a whole string of towns in the north had local states of emergency, and we were running at full normal operation.
Right.
So, you know, those are, and that went on for almost 10 days, 2 weeks, I think, if I remember.
Right. And then we got hit harder on the shoreline with the Halloween snow. Then that was a shoreline piece, and we were out.
Leaves were up. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's when we first started Trunk or Treat, because all of the power lines were down and everything else. So I think
so to Matt's point, something like the longest I can think that those types of things lasted were 2 weeks.
Yep. I have to agree with you on that.
I'm sure there's something terrible and scary that would be longer than 2 weeks, but 2 weeks feels like a long time for a storm.
Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of what we're thinking of.
Or power outages.
Yeah.
And if it's so massive that it's going to be longer than 2 weeks to restore the power, there's probably going to be a state of emergency in the state of Connecticut, I would think.
And the town can continue it if it chooses.
Right. Well, I'm saying as long as if the state's declared it, then we're under it, period.
Mm-hmm.
I know I brought this example up before. After Irene, the town stayed in a state of emergency for almost 2 full months after Irene, because what we were trying to be relieved of is the bidding requirements, because we had all these infrastructure projects that had to start right away.
Right. But, so there were strategic times to keep it under the state of emergency in order to get things done more quickly.
Yeah, we were reopening roads. But on the other hand, the Board of Selectmen was sitting and the town looked normal. We just had a technical state of emergency.
Right.
So now I'm thinking, if we go back to for the first selectman, isn't there wording in there that says that any emergency orders are null and void after 30 days?
Mm-hmm.
And so
unless renewed.
Unless renewed. So do we want to have parity if it's the state called state of emergency versus a town? Do we want to have 2 different pathways, a town emergency versus a state emergency? Or just for simplicity, do we want to keep it at 30 days?
I don't think we can get out of us. If the state has declared a state of emergency, Joe, you might know better. I can't remember. Can we opt out? I don't think we can.
I think so I would have to check the existing executive orders. My rough understanding is a state of emergency is different than a town state of emergency, right? Because we could function normally calling our selectmen in for meetings for town decisions. The state of emergency governs the state. And the reason I was saying the executive order thing, I'm trying to, Lauren, you actually might be the best person to know. There were so many of them. I think one of them triggered the town states of emergency. Am I misremembering that? Or because I thought all the towns went into a state of emergency, or you know what it was? I think they suspended certain decision making on the towns that would have amounted to the same thing. Lauren,
that's basically what they did. They didn't blanket call a state of emergency for every town, but they enacted other things that basically put you into operating under a state of emergency.
Right.
I mean, there were so many executive orders of the state. I think they went to JJJ, right? We went through the alphabet almost 3 times.
Yeah. Well, and that was one of the things that Peggy said, again, kind of going back to this, making it clearer. And to your point, where was the first call of the state of emergency? And, how do you, if and where do you want to state that in the charter of, this is when the clock starts ticking, so that was something that she did comment on, that she felt as though, and Lauren, you probably know better, that there was just a little bit of I don't know if it's confusion, but just, what triggers kind of that. It's, even though the state called the state of emergency and the town knew it had to be in a state of emergency, what's the process for that to happen?
Yeah, so with the current charter, because it doesn't say anything about us automatically having a state of emergency if the state does, it's a meeting of the Board of Selectmen. So using COVID as an example, we had to clobber together a meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, and staff had to come down, I had to come down, drive my 1 hour on Saturday morning to declare the state of emergency. And this was a day after we had already closed schools. So we knew that it was serious. We knew that it had to happen. And we all had to, try to come up with a time that we could all get together over the weekend to declare it. So being able to have the first selectman, declare it on that Friday when we knew that the schools were closing for 2 weeks and we didn't really have a choice, would have made a difference for a lot of us.
Can I suggest one thing that might be, because one thing you didn't want to have happen, there was a friend talked to me about a private association once, and the private association wasn't keeping minutes, and the person who was heading it said, "Oh, I've declared a state of emergency." How? What? So if the first selectman declares a state of emergency, who gets notification?
It's a resolution that goes to the town clerk.
So and the timing for that, so is that, can we serve that by email?
Yep.
And how do we stop transient states of emergency? So for instance, one thing you do in a state of emergency is you can meet without notice. So in quorum. So can I just declare a state of emergency and meet with the members of the Charter Review Commission? It's okay, it's a state of emergency. I'll email the town clerk. Good, we're done. Thanks, we're done. How, you know what I mean? That would be an abuse of the process, but that procedure would work. Boy, I'm glad I showed up.
Yeah, no,
Go ahead, Joan.
No, go ahead.
No, you first.
Yeah, does anyone have a good idea? Like, how do we stop the process abuse? Every morning I declare a state of emergency. I try and contact everyone. I take it away at noon. You know.
Well, I think 3 members of the Board of Selectmen have got to immediately say no. Like,
yeah, but I do what I need to do in those 3 hours. Well, I mean, it's not exactly.
No, but I think one of the things we put in there at the very beginning was declaring the state of emergency upon the request of the emergency operations center. So you can't just declare a state of emergency willy-nilly.
So is there ever, all right, so how does that play the other way? You know, the town's hit by a meteor, you know. Actually, I don't know if you guys remember the horrible example of the plane. Okay. I don't know if you guys remember the horrible example of the plane that went down in the Sound. Oh, it's got to be 20 years ago at least. That went down right near Madison. So, you know, like that would have been, if it would have come closer to shore, that would have been a town state of emergency, whether or not the EOC could muster or not.
Well, I think the EOC, you know, you've got your police department in the backup, you've got fire. I mean,
I think this is definitely a conversation to have with Sam. We have a 500 and something page emergency manual that we all have to follow. The state requires it. And Sam is the emergency management overseer of the whole town. So I think, you know, he might have some good information as to what we automatically have to do, what parameters the state already gives us under emergency management, and whether or not we need to put any of that in the charter itself.
That sounds good.
That's reasonable.
And I also think, I think Matt had said something at the start of this discussion around kind of 2 pipes, one being a declaration of emergency for the state of Connecticut, another one being that is solely for the town. You know, if this is going to be a guide that people are looking for clarity from it, I think that that's the kind of thing, you know, that's kind of what they're looking for from us. It just makes sense to me to have, if it's from the state, this is the process. If it's from just the town, this is the process, because they would be distinct and different. Because, and even if, I would think that even if the state is in a state of emergency, that we can go ahead and declare one and say, yes, indeed, we are. But just because the state's in one, act like kind of like what Joan was saying before, just because the state says that they are one, and we say after a while, I don't know that we really need to be in a state of emergency here in Madison anymore, we can take it back and we can let the guys in Hartford worry about it. So I think that there are those 2 pipes make sense to me. I don't know, you know, I know it's a little extra work, but I don't know what the rest of the group feels.
No, I agree with you. And I think that, you know, although we're trying to keep this very simple and clear and brief, I think that if something that the last 2 years has taught us is that we do need to spend some more time in the charter with this. This could be our signature for the next 10 years. You know,
Yeah.
it was born from the pandemic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would add, you know, the thought that somehow clear and brief, that the very often those two are total opposites.
Yeah.
Like if you want to drive, you know, folks who want to follow regulations crazy, make them really brief and use phrases that are vague because you've got to make it brief. If you want to make it easy, spell it out. What do you got to do? What do you not have to do? Where there's flexibility. So I think, you know, we shouldn't worry about the length. I think one thing the lawyer said the last time we hadn't thought about, which I thought was a really good idea, is having an index for this thing.
Yeah.
So that a citizen who says, well, look, I'm just interested in this, find it fairly easily.
Yep.
So I won't worry about the length. I think we can make it, yeah, again, clarity is important.
You think there would be value in having, if we're having Sam, to also have Peggy at the same time?
I think Peggy, Sam, and Jack Drum.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that'd be wise.
Yeah.
Because I do think, again, just from talking with, you know, some of the things that Peggy said too, I think Sam and Jack may have approached a little bit differently what the state does during the state of emergency or says they'll do, versus I think Sam and Jack had different views of what really the town needed to provide or stockpile, or, you know, so again, I think it would be interesting to hear the three views and then what really did happen, because now we've got 2 years worth of seeing, you know, the state said they would do something, and for the most part they came through. They may have been late, but for the most part they did come through on what they said they were going to do for the towns, according to Peggy.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. You know, have them in, and that way they can almost do a little bit of a debrief for us.
Yep.
Probably be triggering them left and right.
All right, so we comfortable with what's here? Should we go back to the 10 point?
I do.
Yep.
I think the next thing is just thinking about, you know, what all the emergency powers entail for the first select person.
So I think some of that is captured after, so going back to where we were, the Board of Selectmen may enact any such ordinances and regulation as it deems necessary under the circumstances or pursuant to section 4.3.2. So probably need to look at that, and authorize action by the first selectman or the acting first selectman if the first selectman cannot be reached. And 4.3.2. I think spells out. So that's the delegation and assignment of duties. The first selectman may assign and delegate duties to the selectmen, to officers, and to employees responsible to them. The first selectman shall be the ex officio member of all boards, commissions, committees of the town, but without power to vote. They may.
Can I ask just a question about that piece for a quick second? Why is the first selectman necessarily an ex officio member of everything? Is there so I'll give an example. There was a past first selectman who decided to come and sit on the Planning and Zoning Commission at the table briefly when there was a discontent over the Planning and Zoning Commission. And it's because they're ex officio. Is that necessarily, it was fine, by the way, but it was very weird, but it was actually okay. I don't want to say there was this alerting problem, but do they need to be ex officio members of every commission? I mean, in theory, when I was Board of Finance chair, an ex officio member can sit at the table. Why aren't they just attendees like everybody else?
Is that, Lauren, anything with state statute that requires that or mandates that, or is that just something?
You know, I'm not 100% certain. I do want to say that it is in state statute, but I don't know off the top of my head if it is, or if that's just how I'm remembering it.
I think it might be just like Tom Hanks, that thing we do.
Yeah.
I can
I think it's in the charter. I think it was that the first selectman is an ex officio of each board and commission and can designate a liaison. I thought that was part of, they can't vote, correct?
Yeah, no, it's definitely in the charter. I guess part of my question is
Why?
Oh, yeah. Why?
Yeah, like why do we need, is there a reason we need that?
If you cannot vote, what can you do as an ex officio member as distinct from someone who just shows up for the meetings of the public?
You can participate in all conversations as if you're a member.
Okay.
Typically, it's an advisory role, Bob, I think. You know, that's how it would normally be treated, but I see your point.
I mean, it's just a little bit of a weird thing. So I don't know. Maybe it's a question better addressed to Ira. As I said, yeah, I've seen it used in a strange capacity, not strange, in a different capacity. Most of the time, the first selectman just sits in the front and answers questions whenever asked, you know, and when a line item comes up, you turn to the first selectman like, you know, he or she is staff and said, what about this thing? Why do you need the salt? And they say, blah, 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 you know, as opposed to sitting and engaging in discussion and having a right to speak as if you're a member of the Board of Finance.
Yeah, and taking the perspective of, you know, being negative, you could see a situation where somebody could sit on a board to intimidate or to pressure, those types of things. So, you know, I think that we all have the ability to go to any meeting as an attendee for information. I don't see why we have to have a different
standing.
And you can imagine things like if we have an ethics commission, would you want the first selectman to be sitting in an ethics commission if the complaint's about the first selectman? You know, it's like,
do we want to remove that then?
Unless there's a reason to keep it, which I can't conceive of. I hadn't thought about it till we read the line, but it is a weird thing.
Well,
so maybe.
I mean, it even goes further. I mean, because then it goes on to say, and they may, in writing, appoint a selectman or elector not already a member of that board, commission, or committee to be their representative on any board, commission, or committee, but without power to vote. So again, the question becomes, what's the purpose of both them and this designated person other than, you know, I mean.
So rather than ex officio member, why don't we say shall be a liaison? Which is what we currently do.
I don't think we need to do that. The Board of Selectmen can do that all they want. It's an unofficial thing. They can appoint one liaison, they can appoint two, you know, they can, or they can just go like they normally do. So I guess if it's in state statute, we don't need it. And if it's not, it probably shouldn't be there, is the way I would think about it. It's in state statute, they have the power anyway.
Right. Okay.
Yep.
All right. So then going back to authorized action by the first selectman or the acting first selectman, the first selectman cannot be reached. The enactment of such ordinances or regulations shall be accompanied by a statement of the facts constituting the state of emergency. If after a reasonable effort to notify all members of the board, a quorum can't be reached, the quorum provisions shall be suspended. All emergency ordinances and regulations shall become effective immediately upon enactment and shall automatically stand repealed 30 days. That's a change from 21. Following the effective date, or actually no, repealed. I'm gonna say it was, we had 21 and then cross that out and put 30. Following the effective date thereof, unless prior thereto such ordinance or regulation has been affirmed at a special town meeting or repealed by the Board of Selectmen. So there's a little bit of repetitiveness from what we added in under the 4.1.4. Does anyone feel, or?
Yeah, I don't think you need the first sentence any longer because we put it in 4.1.4, right?
Right, right. Definitely that does not need to be there, correct. Okay, everybody good with the? Okay. So then this is the major addition, is after the initial 5-day period, any 3 board members of the Board of Select may petition the town clerk to hold a special meeting for any purpose. After a maximum of 30 days, the state of emergency will be automatically repealed unless the first selectman calls a special meeting and the board determines that a state of emergency continues to exist in the town of Madison.
Yep.
And then this is where the additional authorities, I think, were discussed, was adding in.
Can we scroll down a little? Yeah.
The approved unbudgeted financial expenditures and contracts for work for services not to exceed 30 days and in excess amount not to exceed 10% of the overall town budget. Expenditures exceeding this amount may require the Board of Selectmen approval. Board of Selectmen approval. And then enacted emergency orders or temporary ordinances, such orders not to exceed 30 days without approval. So we're just cycling back to the Board of Selectmen. And then the last one is establish an emergency shelter location, including by takeovers of the Board of Education facilities. And we changed that to broaden to anything operated in through the budget.
Any buildings that operate under the town or Board of Education budgets.
Yeah.
So that allows some flexibility for the library, for the police, for the firehouses. Not that you'd want to have an emergency shelter in a firehouse unless it was absolutely critical because you've got the working, But like, the upstairs of the Nomad, the North Madison Firehouse, could be a really good North Madison shelter for a short period of time because it's got the space compared to Hose 1.
So just two quick things. So first of all, I did put in the chat the language as to, which is a little less than we had, as to how a first selectman can become ex officio. And my argument would be, if it's in the statute, we don't need it. And then the other thing, the language by takeover, as somebody who teaches Fifth Amendment takings law on occasion, is just spooky. That can't be what we write. Established and included by takeover of all public buildings. So just public space, right? So why isn't that established emergency shelter location in any location owned by the town of Madison, irrespective of its purpose, something like that. By takeover of all.
Takeover has this imagery of some stormtroopers, marching in.
Bob, it's better than when you suggested commandeering.
So the only memory, yeah. So the only thing
the banks I was talking about commandeering.
Yeah. So, because it's all public buildings which operate under the town board of education, town or board of education budgets. Why doesn't it just say all buildings owned or operated by town?
The library.
Because we're trying to do the library and we're trying to get the
Fire stations.
And
they're not owned by the town.
As a possible use in an emergency.
All right, so owned, operated, or funded by town, including fire stations, ambulance, and
that's why we're saying.
Great, clarify it. That's great.
Buildings which operate under the town.
Yeah.
Budgets.
I do like what Joe just said: owned, operated, or funded.
Owned, operated, or funded. So which are owned, operated, or funded.
Yeah, and let's get rid of takeover.
Takeover's got to go.
All right, what's another? Let me bring up word. Let's do the thesaurus.
I don't think we need one. Just establish emergency in any location, including all public buildings. In any, guess can't be any location because that makes it sound like it's Joan's home.
In any public building.
In any public building which is owned, operated, or funded by the town or board of education budgets.
Okay.
Okay.
Do we want to say public building or just building? Because what's the definition of a public building versus?
Well, or building used for public purpose.
That's good.
Though I suppose the language is a little weird, right? So if the town, rents RJ Julia, one night a month for the arts club, does that mean we can take over Roxanne's building as an emergency shelter?
No, because it's not funded.
Well, how much of it's funded? A little of it's funded.
The RJ Julia?
Under my example, yeah. If the town funds a small part of if it gives a grant to the movie theater to operate, is it funded? Substantially funded?
Yeah, I mean, you could potentially say that, but then
we have a taking.
If there's an emergency that we need the movie theater, I think we'd be kind of in a little bit of a
yeah.
I say we keep it as is and they can strike it if they want.
Yep. I think I'd like to get the attorneys. Yeah. Because there's really not a lot of those,
It's ambulance, fire, and library, I think.
Yeah. Basically. That's what you're looking at. And police.
Well, the police is a town building.
That's true too. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's the end of that section. If I've got it right on.
So Liz, based upon how the discussion you had with Peggy, you think we're getting there in terms of more specificity that she was hoping to get from our group? It seems like we've gotten there a bit today, and you feel that that's about the spirit of what she was hoping for?
Yeah, and I mean, I kept going back to that, was both the making sure that we had captured the spirit from the first meeting. That's kind of how I started the conversation with her. And I think, clarifying some of like the authority, like with the budget and taking, being able to have access to buildings and that type of thing. So I think she felt that, yes, that was making it more clear. I think, going back to what I said originally, and Lauren can probably, comment on this, it just was when they were trying to figure it out when it happened with the pandemic, which was a little bit unique as opposed to a hurricane or a weather event type thing. Right. Just having it clear of kind of the execution of it wasn't necessarily documented via the charter. So I don't know, Lauren, do you think that's a fair statement?
Yeah, I think that is.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
I think we've gotten, I think it's become a lot clearer. And I think there's been some nice boundaries put in. So there's not runaway trains. And, you know, during what was, like you said, there was it was like 2 or 3 months where we were under a state of emergency to assist us with FEMA, but you know, we had a first selectman who still called regular meetings. They were called special meetings, but we acted as though they were regular meetings. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, I think we want to ensure the capability that if there is, you know, any kind of rogue issue that, yeah, if 3 of the board members feel as though this is wrong, then they can, or they want to have another special meeting, or they want more information, they can call for it. And I think that that's a positive.
Yeah, the one other thing that she did ask me to kind of throw out to you all, that not specific necessarily to this, although it does have a little bit of meaning, was this, as the charter's written now, I think in there about the acting first and what are the requirements and absence. And just again, re-looking at that as it relates to now our capabilities to do so much remote. So for example, I guess back in the day when you went even out of state, you had to, I guess when you first get into office, you identify who your acting first is. So even if you were to cross state lines, in theory, even if it's for 24 hours, you're supposed to. And the question that she thought it would be good for us to think about is, you know, given the capabilities now of so much of what we do can be electronically and remote, and people go on vacation and they bring their laptops and they still, you know, attend meetings and all of that, just where we may want to think about that as it relates to the charter and specifically to this acting first, and what does quote out of town mean?
So that's purposefully not in the charter. What's in the chart, like this out of town thing, that's precedent and past practice. But what's in the charter, it just says that the acting first selectman will serve when they're instructed in writing by the first selectman during a temporary absence. So the charter, I think, is purposefully vague.
Got it. Okay.
The policy or precedent that we have is the same policy that we use for staff being allowed to take home town vehicles. And this is kind of like a state practice. And that is, if you have to respond to an emergency and live within 30 miles, you can take home a town vehicle because you are expected to respond to an emergency. So when I started here, how Fillmore explained it to me was, if I am going more than 30 miles away and cannot respond to an emergency for more than 24 hours, I will call an acting first selectman. And that's not written anywhere. It's not charterized. It's not in Board of Selectmen policies. It's just the practice that we have had.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
The only thing that's a little weird about it is, and I'm sorry, I didn't review this section. Can the Board of Selectmen appoint an acting first selectman without the first selectman?
It's not board. I'm going to try sharing my screen. For some reason, last time I shared my screen, I lost like all the video. So hopefully I don't have to do any, yeah, I've lost all of your faces and I don't know why.
Well, really, that's all the better.
How disappointing. How tough for you, Lauren.
So this is the parameters now of what's in the charter.
So where's the section where the first selectman becomes incapacitated?
That's B, after 30 days. Do we want to tighten that up?
Well, I was going to say maybe this problem sort of goes away if at any point in time, 3 selectmen can appoint an acting first selectman. You know what I mean? If that way, so if something weird happens, but it's not 30 days, because 30 days is a really long time, particularly if it's in an emergency, right? So it may be, you may want to duplicate sort of the thinking you had before, that any 3 can appoint an acting.
We want to do that only in the state of emergency?
No, I would say if the first selectman is unavailable and unreachable,
right,
and 3,
then yeah, you just don't want to have all of a sudden 3 people go, okay,
yeah,
you're the
maybe not
now.
have them appoint the acting first selectman, but activate the acting first selectman. You know
right.
what I mean?
Yeah.
That way, it's not really much of a political poll, because it's the person that the first selectman picked. Jesus God. Well, sorry, I've been talking a long time.
How many things did we try to do when you were acting first, Joe?
The only thing I ever got to do was the bear. That was it.
The bear, I know.
Of all the things.
Well,
even kid, though, it was going to become McDougal instead of Madison.
I know, I tried.
Bob, do you have a question?
No, just a comment that I really like the language of instead of the out of town stuff, saying if the first selectman is absent. I mean, that's a great phrase, because frankly, you can be in Hilton Head on vacation and do a meeting if you so want, and
yep.
etc. We all do stuff, but it's if you're absent and you can be in town and hospitalized, but absent.
Right.
Lauren, just small potatoes, but in B, can we change absent from his office to their office?
Oh, just absence from office.
Yeah, I just wanted some non-gendered.
Yeah, I know, but.
Well, we can go through and take all the hises and turn them into their.
Okay, yeah, that's true.
Yeah, there's still a lot in there.
I know, Bob.
Bad grammar.
Well,
most cases, you can just get rid of the his or her and just make it office.
But there is now a pronoun.
Yeah, why is it absent and not unreachable? Is that the same thing?
I would think so.
No, you can be reachable in your coma in the hospital.
So that would involve a completely different sort of cell phone.
Yes.
And now we're getting punchy.
Yeah, I think we've gone a little long.
Yeah, I think we lost our wave.
But I think it was a good session.
I think this was by far the greatest meeting of the Charter Review Commission. I think.
I don't think so. But thank you for allowing me to do it tonight.
Thank you.
This is where we try to coup and put Liz in install Liz instead of Joe.
Oh, absolutely.
Rules of appointment is
Joe, you're not getting out of it that easy.
Okay.
Oh.
All right, Lauren, any questions from anybody? Looks like, let's see, we have 8 participants, so.
And we had a member of the public and they left.
Oh, okay. All right, do I have a motion to?
Oh, just before we do, I'm sorry. You guys are probably hungry. I ate.
Yeah. I've got a sauce cooking and it's smelling really
sorry. You ate. Oh, Jesus.
Really quick before we bolt. Is there a certain section that we should, namely me, evaluate before we get together next time around? So I could just kind of be ready.
Well, I'm hoping that at some time, and Lauren, I don't know if you've heard from Ira. So, because I'm hoping that we can do the legal review, and then what review the legal review in the small group, where I think it was me, Joan, and Matt. I think you were commandeered into that one, if I recall, mustered into service. And then we're going to step through those. And then I think what we had talked about was maybe breaking the charter up into bits to have each of us do a detailed review. at that time. Am I remember? Am I
Yeah, that's
missing a
correct.
step?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we have a schedule for these meetings? Because I don't have them in my.
No, we actually don't have another meeting of your full committee scheduled right now. And I don't have a meeting yet with Ira. I talked to him on Friday afternoon, and he was trying to start writing down his deep dive of everything. And he was supposed to get back to me with a day next week that this smaller portion of us can meet with him. So the question is, do you guys want to have a meeting next week where you continue your review? Do you want to wait until after we have the meeting with Ira? It's really up to you guys.
Why don't we have the meeting with, if we can, with Peggy and Sam and the chief?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, we just did the section. We should just, it'd be nice to button that one up. That's been one of our big, to-dos ever since we started.
That's great.
Yep.
So Lauren, if you, I know trying to herd that particular group of cats is difficult, but maybe we can at least set a time among us and see if it magically works. Would that be okay?
Sure.
So Wednesdays are not great for me, but I could do what do we look like on Thursday, which is usually our meeting time on the 3rd?
Good for me.
Does anyone have a problem with Thursday?
I'm clear. Round 2 of the cap, so I may be a little numb, but that's okay.
This Thursday, the 27th?
No, Thursday the 3rd, I think I was looking at.
Oh, okay.
3rd.
Yeah, I could do that.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
Lauren, can you maybe check?
And it looks like it's clear on all of our schedules for staff too.
Oh my God.
Wow.
I know.
I don't know what to do.
All right, everybody buy a lottery ticket right now.
Yeah.
Is
And we
5 o'clock okay?
5:35. Okay. 5 works for me.
Yeah, 5 works.
Yep.
Great.
So let's see if we can get them, and then let's literally talk through these pieces since they're fresh in our minds, and then hopefully by then we'll have some clarity on the IRA situation.
Okay.
And Lauren, I'm sorry if I missed this at the beginning of the meeting. Because originally we would have been finishing up around now. Have we spoken to the selectmen about the timing of the charter review by any chance?
I did. And she basically said, as long as we follow the timeline that the state prescribes for charter revision, it's fine. It's not what they initially wanted, but better to have the best possible charter document to go to the public than to try to rush it through just to meet the May referendum.
Good. That sounds okay with me. Our charge expires the end of March, correct?
Yes.
Good. Well, I think that's probably plenty of time, to be honest. Because assuming we get IRA done, then we have this issue. And the only thing that we really have kind of laid up on is still language around around the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance. Right? We kind of listened to everyone like, oh, it's fine. But then we had all that other stuff at the beginning where people said it's not fine at all. So I don't know if I'm personally, I wouldn't, if we have time to revisit it ourselves at the very end, I wouldn't necessarily mind reviewing that again. Unless I'm the only one that feels that way.
Finance role is a live issue.
Yeah. So I don't know if I'm alone, if everyone else thinks it's, worth just leaving it alone, but I wouldn't mind a little more discussion. I don't know that we had resolution. We had meetings. I just don't know that we ourselves had resolution.
So just so you know, I'm going to be out of country from the March 16th to the 28th in Anguilla. And I'm trying not to bring my laptop.
Well, we will then mark
if
you
I
as
have
absent
to, I
or
will.
unavailable.
Right.
If I have to, I will, but I will be probably drinking a tropical drink during the session. So
at that point, you should be the editing and style committee. It's fine.
It's great. Go for it. No problem.
Well, we have a long time between then and now.
Yeah. I think we'll probably be pretty buttoned up by then.
I would think so. All right. Good. Oh, and the only other thing that we also don't want to lose sight of, so we have the emergency powers, we have the IRA stuff, and kind of break it up for a general walkthrough among the pieces. And we also have to then consider guidance on what questions the voters should be asked.
The breakouts.
You know, so how do we want to, do we want to break certain issues out directly? Like, you know, the size of the Board of Finance or the terms of the Board of Selectmen? Are there a couple of issues which we would like to recommend they call out separately so that if they get opposition, people can vote yay or nay on them, but not lose the body of the charter itself?
Joe, do you remember how many questions, like what max questions we can ask?
I think that if I recall, Nancy said that she wanted 4, but okay. I don't know that that's a legal requirement.
No. So it's 7 total on a referendum ballot, and she asked you for 4 because if it went to the May referendum, we had 3 other questions. So you were getting the balance of that referendum.
But if it goes to the November, is there, we need to make sure everything's in by August, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So if we recommend and send it on its way in March, then the Board of Selectmen can talk about it in April and May to figure out if they agree with the question selection, because it's going to be the first time they've been doing that either, right? No other board has done separate questions on the charter. They can have, in some respects, this really helps them because they'll have their hearings just like we did once upon a time, Joan.
Mm-hmm.
And then they should then be done with their job, hopefully sometime before the 4th of July. Okay, but we'll figure all that out later. So great. So let us know if the 3rd works, Lauren. And as soon as you hear from Ira and when they might be ready, let me know, and let's get that one scheduled up soon.
Will do.
All right. Good. Thanks, Liz.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Good night.
You guys are great.
Take care.
Night.